This is Mortgage Lending Mastery. Get the knowledge you need from America's mortgage mentor with more than 35 years of experience and over $1 billion in lifetime fundings. You'll learn to advance your mortgage practice quickly and efficiently. Also, be sure to check out Jen's book, Launch: How to Take Your Business to New Heights, available on Amazon. For a signed copy, contact Jen at jenduplessis.com. Now, here is certified mortgage planner and CEO of Kinetic Spark Consulting, Jen Duplessis.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Mortgage Lending Mastery. I'm your host, Jen Duplessis, where we help you with your personal and professional growth. And today my guest is Marc Guberti. He is from New York, and Marc is a USA Today and Wall Street Journal best-selling author with over 100,000 students in 180 countries enrolled in his online program. And the reason why I have him on here is because his online program is about podcasting. So why in the heck podcasting? And the reason why I wanted to bring him on is that so many people are learning about the power of podcasting. And I thought, what a great time to bring someone else on, someone else's voice who's been extremely successful at this, and how it can help you in your business, no matter what you do. So whether you're a lender, a realtor, an entrepreneur, podcasting can really help your business. So Marc's going to share with us the tip of how it can help us without giving up too much, but not even because of your course, but because we don't have all the time in the world to answer all the questions. But so Marc, thank you for joining us today. It's an honor to have you.
Jen, thank you so much for having me on the show.
Yeah. So Marc, tell us a little bit about you and how you got into podcasting.
Sure. So the way I started off is I wanted to get into podcasting, I think 2014, but it didn't happen. I tried twice to start a podcast. And this is one of those things where it's like you try twice and, you really want to make it happen for you. Go for it again. So I went for it in 2016, breakthrough success. I reached out to a few people before I even knew what I was doing. And then when you get a yes, you have to figure out what you're supposed to do very quickly. So so that's the story of how breakthrough success came to be. Fast forward, I have 3 podcasts that I now host, and I have 6 virtual summits as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love virtual summits. I've been on quite a few lately. They're really good too. So the podcast that I was on was Breakthrough Success, and I know you have a few others as well. But what was the reason behind wanting to get into podcasting?
I saw podcasting as a way where I could learn from other experts and build really awesome connections.
Yeah,
for my business, because business at the end of the day is about relationships.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to dive into that a little bit and find out, because the key, I believe, in podcasting now, and granted, there are a lot of people who podcast for the fun of it. There are those that are in between, and there are those that are podcasting purely for the monetization of it. But I would say that that's the same thing in Facebook, right? People go on for the fun of it. People go on for a little bit. They kind of dabble on both sides, and they don't really get business from it. And then those that do, for example, Facebook ads, or they've really ramped up the way that they're trying to market. But we really want to hone in on how to get business from podcasting, not to make it just a fun thing, but maybe there's a stepping process. Maybe it's fun for a while and you start testing things. But I'd really like to, figure that out as well. So tell me, before we do that though, tell me about the connections that you've made as a result of being a podcaster on both sides, both you being the host and the guest.
Being able to, I've made connections that I've gotten on more stages because I'm a podcast host, and I interview event organizers, and then they decide, wow, what a great conversation. Let's bring this guy on the stage. I've interviewed people who have become affiliates for my products. Sometimes I'll interview them on a podcast and see, okay, if this interview goes well, what virtual summit can I have you speak at also? So sometimes it's me continuing the relationship with someone where I've interviewed some people 4 or 5 times just because I have all these different summits and podcasts going on. So part of that is really figuring out who has different connections, who is someone who can, they have an audience and my product or service fits in perfectly. So there's a lot of different approaches you can take with podcasting, and the relationships I've built have really opened up so many doors that I couldn't have opened without podcasting.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I'm with you. I'm with you on that. That's definitely what it is for me as well. So if someone's listening to this and they're an entrepreneur, let's say that they are, the owner of a floral shop, or a local stager, or they're a mortgage lender, they're a realtor, what would be the benefit for them in their connections? I think I know it. I'm asking a question and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to, but just to share with everyone, why would that be really important for someone to consider doing to make connections? Let's say they don't want to be on a stage, but they want to make connections.
Well, I think part of it is figuring out who you want to connect with. So maybe you start a show that kind of gets your potential customer on board. One of the things I've noticed with a lot of the podcasting clients I get, a lot of them are authors who don't yet have podcasts. So part of the reason for continuing and making the Wealth Author Summit evergreen is I can interview authors who don't necessarily have podcasts yet. So if you're clear on who your avatar is, you can create a show that brings those people together. And I ask people in the forum, like, are you interested in learning how you can grow your business with podcasting or YouTube? For the people who say yes, those are the people who I follow up with and say, if you're interested in starting a podcast, I help you with that. Let's schedule a free strategy call, see how we can make this work.
Yeah. So I think that's really good. So, just determining who your target market is and then going out and interviewing them. That's really what it is, because it becomes, reciprocation, don't you think? Where they want to help you because and I've always found that, for someone who's never been on a podcast, it's just a conversation. That's just what we're having here. I had someone on the show the other day. It was her first podcast and she was so nervous. And so I didn't even tell her we were recording. So we just started chit-chatting and I was asking her all these questions. And then when we were done, I said, okay, we're done recording. You're already done. She goes, what? I didn't even feel that, It was like going to the dentist. It was great. So I think if you haven't been on a podcast, one of the great things about being a guest on a podcast is that it increases your market influence. You become a master in your market. And that is a client attraction feature. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, guesting on other podcasts, it is certainly easier because there's no post-production stuff you have to do after guesting. Granted, having a podcast helps with authority. You could interview hundreds or even thousands of people eventually, so there's benefits to both. But if you guest on a podcast, then you are getting in front of someone else's audience, and that's just more potential for you to grow.
Yeah, I totally agree. What are your thoughts about listening to a podcast and how you can monetize from listening to a podcast, just being a listener?
So when it comes to what I do with my podcast and people who listen to my show, or just like you listen to someone else's show?
I just listen to a podcast, and how could I monetize, just listening to a podcast aside from, I learned something and I might be able to apply that to my business like this, right? Saying, maybe I will do a podcast, but how could someone monetize just being a guest just listening to podcasts?
So the way you make money is money has to exchange hands. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to listening to a podcast, you can reach out to the host, you can reach out to the guest. You can see if there's a Facebook group for that particular show, like Breakthrough Success has a Facebook group. You can be active in that community, and then people see what you're doing. Maybe they ask you about your services later. So the big thing from just being a listener is just engaging with the brand.
Yeah, and I think that's really powerful too, because, we could post something on the internet and hope that everybody sees it. All of our 5,000 friends, right? But they aren't all going to see it. So I like that it just kind of hones in, into somebody. Okay, so we've addressed why you want a podcast: market influence, credibility, expansion of your brand, connections, opportunities for more sales opportunities, because people are getting to know who you are and not just what you do. So hopefully just in that short period of time, you can see why it's really, really important to consider having a podcast, no matter what you do for your business. So now let's just say that I say, okay, great, I'm going to do a podcast. I like what Marc's saying. I like what Jen's saying. How do I get started? And what are some of the things that people make mistakes getting started? Because you, in fact, said that you had started but had failed a couple times on it. So what are some of the hiccups that you had encountered so that others wouldn't have to encounter them?
I think the biggest thing for me was just not knowing what to do. So I use Libsyn for my podcast hosting. You can use the coupon code Breakthrough to get 2 free months. But I didn't know Libsyn or podcast hosting like the sites. So I feel like if you know that, you are very much ahead of the game, because that was the thing that really stopped me. I just didn't know if they were. I didn't know how to do the research, or I just didn't bother. I don't know which, but that was one of the big things that hurt me. And then when it comes to just being able to conduct an interview, all you really have to do is just have some kind of intro, have an intro for the guest, and then just have some questions written down, an idea of how you want to go with the conversation. Now, as you do more of these, you don't have to write down questions anymore. I haven't written down questions for a while.
Yeah, I haven't either.
I mean, it's just conversation flows. You just know which direction to take it. But I'd say, and then it's just a matter of getting the guests. So it could sound like a lot of work to someone who hasn't done it, but I mean, if you do a podcast with just one episode a week, maybe you're talking about 2 hours a week, like total time, like interviewing someone, post-production stuff, social media promotion. It's not a lot of work to have a podcast once you're in it.
Yeah, and I would agree. And I think that a lot of people may be apprehensive because they don't know who to talk to, but or who they would have as a guest. But you know what I found when I first started, and of course I've done monologue and interview. I do a combination of both. Because sometimes I just have something to say that I want to talk about myself. And so, you know, you could do a monologue podcast where it's just you talking, or podcast where it's just you talking. You could always do interviewing. You could do a little combination of both. Once your antennas are up and you're out walking around, you're networking in your association, you know, whatever that may be, all of a sudden you're like, wow, that person's really great. I need to have them on my podcast. So you'll never be for lacking guests, in my opinion.
Yeah, especially as you get deeper into it.
Yeah, I think that's good. So the other thing that people tend to, and I think one of the reasons why some podcasts have failed is that they don't understand or can't find or don't know, or they have a roadblock about the content. Like I can never have enough content to do 400 podcasts. What are some thoughts around that?
One of the big things when it comes to creating content for your podcast, when you interview people, you don't have to, like, you do the basic planning, but like you have a set time to interview someone, and it's just a conversation. If you've had like 1,000 conversations within your entire existence, you could have 1,000 podcast episodes. And all you do is you just gear them on a specific topics. Like we're talking about podcasting right now. This is a conversation that could just as easily be happening off a podcast, but instead of being off a podcast, it's on a podcast. We're recording this, and there's your episode. So
yeah, I absolutely love
I would maybe think of it less. I mean, maybe think of it less of like content and more of just conversations. You'll see how easy it is to create a ton of content for podcasters.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think the other thing too is you could take anything from online, any article, any conversation that a group is having, any conversation that you're seeing out there, you know, anything that's in the news, and you could do, you know, take opinions on it. I mean, that can be a podcast all by itself. And, you know, how do I want to say this? Like taking a few minutes every day and finding out what's going on in the news can also help, you know, in your discussions with people on a daily basis, right? Okay, so let's talk about your program, about what you do to help people, because one of the things that you've been extremely successful in is, I'm going to call it client attraction. I don't want to call it, I'm going to say this, but it's not what I'm thinking, is, you know, not drawing people to you to have over 100,000 students. But can you imagine if you know, no matter what you do, if you had 100,000 clients, right? Anything you do, how would your life change if you had 1,000 clients right away, you know, just like that. So it's this law of attraction rather than, you know, the pull that comes in. So help us understand what we need to be prepared for. And maybe it's a mind shift, or maybe it's a tactical skill in being able to attract clients to our programs.
So it really comes back to knowing who your avatar is and attracting as much of that avatar as possible. So like with interviewing, earlier I mentioned 3 podcasts, 6 virtual summits. I plan on upping both of those numbers because for my business, I have no problem with interviewing over 100 people each month. And because, you know, that's my avatar, that's a lot of potential clients that I could get. So instead of cold calling or
Ugh.
like trying to build a relationship. Like, podcasting is such a quick way to building a relationship. If you don't become a client, I still have content. But if you're just going after strategy calls and stuff, like there's this, all you could really say is it was a learning experience and you don't have extra content. So that's why I love the whole interviewing as many people as possible. The only thing is, you still got to publish all those interviews, which is why I plan on upping the virtual summits and the podcasts in the future.
Yeah, yeah, I know. Well, for the first, I don't know, maybe year and a half, I did my own production, my own post-production. I don't do any of that anymore because it's just so time consuming. And, at some point, everybody, and so there are plenty of companies out there that do that as well. So I don't want anyone to think, well, if I have to do a podcast and I have to do all this post-production and I'm not techie, it's really just a matter of having a phone conversation, right? And for so many years, now podcasting has gone into the video and audio space, but it wasn't that way when it first started. It was purely audio, and I used to do all my interviews with my cell phone and my didn't have earbuds because they came out later, but with my earphone, and I would go into our closet because it was the quietest place in the house, and I would just talk to people, right? And so it's just a recording. That's all it is a quick recording. And we all have the ability to do that. So you don't have to go to the extent of, what we do at this point, but eventually, you could get there. So I think that's great. So how about like 1 to 3 tips on creating a successful monetized podcast? And it could be all over the place. It's just, what are one to maybe 3 tips that people could use that you see in your clients that are always doing the same thing, and you're saying, if I could just teach these people how not to do these things, they'd be so much more successful?
So I'll focus on 3 different groups.
Yeah.
And it fits into the 1 to 3 tip threshold. So there's 3 different ways you can make money with a podcast. You can make money with guests. Mm-hmm. You can make money via the listeners. You can make money via sponsorships. So for sponsorships, you can go after sponsors the traditional way. Obviously, this helps if you have more downloads. You can also get a little creative and bundle things together. Like one of the things I do for people who want to come on one of my shows is I say, hey, if you want to sponsor the episode, I'll give you 2 commercials. I'll give you 10 social media posts. I'll send an email to my 100,000 students. So some of the guests end up sponsoring the show, and I do get traditional sponsors as well because I do the outreach. And it helps to have a media sheet for the traditional sponsors, for the other sponsors. If you have a big, if guest sponsor your show, if you have a big audience and you can demonstrate that, you'll give them more exposure. They will take you up on your offer. So sponsorships is one part. The guests, some of them do sponsor. Some of them also become clients though, because of, I get people on my show who fit my avatar. I mean, I could have like a big name on my show, but I'd rather have someone on my show who I feel like I can best serve in that client setting. And some people, they don't become clients, but they buy my books. So that's like, I don't intentionally do that downsell, but some people will say like, I'm not ready to go into your coaching right now, but I'll buy your book, Podcast Domination, something like that. And then finally, the listeners, the key thing with the listeners is to get them involved and engaged with your show. So I recently did a Facebook challenge where one of my listeners actually posted in the group where she recorded herself at a train station talking. And it was the whole like get out of your comfort zone kind of vibe. But, if you get your listeners engaged in that way, then they're paying more attention to your episode. Some of them may schedule a strategy call for you to talk with you even further, but you're getting them engaged, which will help spread your show.
Yeah. I love that. I love all that. And that's applicable to every type of business. As you're talking about it, I'm thinking of all the different types of businesses that just what you said, is very, very important and, can help defray the cost. And it's marketing. I mean, it's really all about marketing. So what else, Marc, would you want to add, for those that are listening about the apprehension of podcasting?
I would say with podcasting, it can look like a lot of work in the beginning. Once you're actually doing it, it's relatively little work. That's one of those things where you just got to believe me on that one. Like if you are a podcast, you know what I'm talking about. It's just think about this. The amount of time you spend listening to this interview from start to finish, just think about like doing the interview like Jen's doing on her end. So however many minutes this interview is, you can make yours shorter or longer based on what you feel. Then it's doing some post-production stuff. So I do some light editing, then you schedule, which takes around 15 minutes. Show notes takes around 15 minutes. If you have a rubric like the one I use, you could even, as Jen does, give that post-production to someone else, which is what I did at the beginning of my show. So, it's not too much work to have a podcast, and the amount of connections you get is amazing. Interviewing people, so much fun. Maybe you expand into virtual summits someday also.
Yeah, and that's for another, right? Because that is a lot of work. That's a different deal. That's quite a bit of work.
Virtual summits are more work than podcasting.
Oh, no question. So, if someone's listening and go, but aren't podcasts, everybody has a podcast. Come on, it's already saturated. What are your thoughts there? I mean, I know what mine are, but what are your thoughts there?
I mean, from the New Media Summit, which we're both a part of, we see Steve Olser say like there's only like 700,000 podcasts. You compare that to the literally billions of blogs, and probably millions upon millions of YouTube channels.
Yeah.
So it's not as saturated as those other two. You also have to factor in not everyone's updating their podcast consistently. So one thing I would do, if you feel like it's saturated, I would look up a keyword where you want to start your podcast. Like if it's in real estate, look to see how many real estate shows there are. I've done that search, and from what I remember, there are not that many real estate podcasts. There are countless real estate blogs, countless YouTube, but not that many podcasts.
Right. I found that too. Well, I was one of the first ones in. So there was, in fact, I think I was the third one in, and the other two shows, one had 2 episodes and stopped, and one had, I think, 14 episodes and stopped. And I'm now, at 230 episodes. So obviously, something's working, and it has been great. So Marc, if someone wants to engage with you and get moving forward with your coaching, what is the best way for them to get in touch with you? And I know we have your email address down here, under your name. If you're watching in YouTube, you can see that, but if you could just repeat the best way to get a hold of you.
Yeah, sure. Marc at marcguberti.com, Marc with a C. That's my email address. Just say, I listened to your interview on Jen. I'd love help with my podcast, my virtual summit, or whatever it is. And I'd definitely love to have a conversation with you.
That sounds great. Is there any other place that you'd like to share or send our our listeners to, so that they could learn more about you before they have that email?
Sure. So marcguberti.com is a good resource. And if you want to see one of my summits in action, just go to contentmarketingsuccesssummit.com.
Contentmarketingsuccesssummit.com.
Yes.
Okay, got it. I want to make sure. So before we leave today, I always ask my clients, my guests, one of two things: a favorite quote that you have, or a book that you're currently reading, not one of your books, one that you're currently reading that is making an impact on your personal and professional development right now.
My big quote is age is not a limit to success. That's just been the thing I've always championed, because I started at 11. I believe that you don't have to wait until graduating college to start doing your dreams. And I feel like you could be doing it a lot earlier, like 10 or even younger than that.
Well, we saw that at the New Media Summit, right? How old was she? I can't remember. Was she 9? And she's been doing a podcast since she was 7.
She's really young. Yeah, I think she started too. It's crazy when she started. She's very young, and she's 10 now, I want to say. She's 10 now.
Yeah, she probably just turned 10, and she's just so...
She's crushing it.
Sure. It's amazing.
Yeah. Amazing. So age is not a limit to success. That's going to be my big nugget for everyone listening.
That's awesome. Well, Marc, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for sharing as much wisdom as we could in the time that we have. I'm sure that there is so much more behind that. I mean, you've got not millions, but several books that you've written. So there's all kinds of information there. What is your most recent book, so we could put a link to that in Amazon?
YouTube Decoded, the book I brought at New Media Summit. That's still my most recent for now.
Okay. YouTube Decoded. Yep. Sounds good. And I have that in my pile. How many do you have?
Oh, I've got a lot also. I don't know.
I think I have
60
some books. Yeah, I'm going to be busy for a while. Well, thank you again for taking time with us today. And, I just wish you the best success in the coming years. And I know that it will continue to grow. And I look forward to continuing our relationship and our connection. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. So again, everyone, thank you so much for listening to Mortgage Lending Mastery. If this was your first time listening, thank you so much for joining us. And I hope that you join us again. And if you are a regular listener, thank you always. I'm so grateful for everyone listening in. And please be sure to pay it forward and share this podcast with your friends and your colleagues. And please ask them to subscribe as soon as possible. And we will catch you next time on Mortgage Lending Mastery.
Thank you for listening to Mortgage Lending Mastery. Looking to streamline and launch your practice by accessing Jen's tools, courses, classes, presentations, and resources? Visit jenduplessis.com to learn about the features and benefits thousands of other professionals have experienced by enrolling in Jen's lifetime membership program. Isn't it about time you consider a coach to take your business to new heights? Contact Jen to start your application process today. Thanks again, and be sure to tune in next week.